Hey everyone, I'm back with a new video. I had several requests for a printed out version of Popeye, so thought this would be a lot of fun. So I'm going to walk through kind of the process of setting up the print and kind of go through the entire process of getting the print done and everything. The first thing I'm doing in Nomad is I duplicated my Popeye scene, and I'm going through and I'm combining objects, just selecting the different layers and merging them into parts. Rather than print Popeye as a whole, I'm going to print him in different pieces, such as the pipe, the head, the two hands, and then the body. Some of what I do, there's not a specific rhyme or reason. It just comes from a lot of experience printing things, and you kind of get a feel for what works, what doesn't. So what I'm doing here is I had the cylinders of the hands the cylinders from the arms and the neck, and I'm going to use those as kind of pegs for the head. So I'm going in, again, I merged the head by itself, with the hat and stuff like that. I've merged the body down now, and I'm smoothing out kind of the nubs of his arms. And I'm getting them nice and round and smooth because I'm going to use those to boolean or to take away from the actual arm models. Just to kind of keep things simple, I will also kind of clear out the paint because we don't really need the paint on this. It's not going to print in color anyways. I'm remeshing everything, so after I've merged it, I turn up the voxel remeshing to a pretty high resolution, to something that's acceptable for the size I'm going to print it out, and then I voxel remesh it all together. Here I'm doing the same for the head. I've got them merged, and now I'm cranking up the voxel remesh resolution and remeshing it. I'm going to end up printing him about 6 inches high. He could be printed larger or smaller, but I think that's going to be a good kind of target range to shoot for. Here I'm also going to use the pipe, and I'm going to merge the pipe together, but I'm also going to use the pipe as, again, a boolean into the mouth. Now, one of the things before I boolean, I'm doing a little trick here where I mask off a section of the pipe, and then I use the engrave to kind of thicken it up, to kind of inflate the area just a little bit, so there's some tolerance for when I print things so it fits in together without it being too tight. I can't get it in there. So that just kind of helps things go together. There's not, again, a very specific tolerance number I'm going for here. It's just kind of eyeballing it and, kind of knowing where it needs to land. So here I'm increasing the thickness on the masked part, and then I hit the engrave emboss, and you can see how it thickens it up there. And that's with a duplicate of the pipe, not the actual pipe itself. I use the duplicate, which I then will take away, and here you'll see me do it. So I turn off the visibility. There I go. I hit the merge, and you see it booleans out of the mouth. So I still have the other original pipe model in there, and you can see how it fits in, but there's a nice little gap around it. I'm going to do the same technique for the arms and the neck. So here in the neck, I just duplicated the body, and I went and trimmed it down, so I'm just looking at this part of the neck, masking it off, using engrave emboss to thicken it up. Engrave emboss, it makes a duplicate, so after you run it, it's a little confusing to use, I think, but I go in and I get rid of the duplicate that wasn't expanded. And I use that expansion, and I boolean into the head. Here I'm duplicating the body, trimming it off, so I'm just dealing with this part of the arm. Again, masking it, using engrave emboss to thicken it up. I know I'm going fast here, but it really is a pretty straightforward process. So using engrave emboss to thicken it up, and then I use that to boolean or minus the geometry from each arm. And if you haven't done booleans, are really easy to do in Nomad. All you have to do is you select the two layers and you turn the visibility off on one of them, and then tell it to merge, and it will basically boolean it. It will minus the geometry. So now I've done that. So I've got holes in the arms where those little arm pegs are going to go, hole in the head for the pipe in the neck. Now I'm just creating a cylinder, duplicating it, and just kind of playing around just to get a simple base. Subdivide it, get it round. And I'll also kind of trim it off on the bottom to make sure it's flat. A base is a really good idea for a model when you're not entirely sure on the balance, if he'll stand up by himself. When I end up printing this, I found that I printed his head solid and his body hollow, and that caused the head to kind of make his body want to topple forward. So it was a good thing I had the base, because then I could glue the feet to the base and I didn't have to worry about balance. If I had hollowed the head, however, it's possible he would have been fine without the base. And I'll get into kind of hollowing and that process here in just a second when we move out of Nomad. But now I have all these pieces. I'm decimating it for print. And again, you just decimate it to where you can get the poly count as low as you can without losing the quality that you're gonna see in your print. And so I just decimate it just to kind of taste and just get it as close as I can. I want it pretty high res because I am gonna print this out nice and smooth. From here, I will export the individual parts of the model: the head, the pipe, each arm, the body, and the base. And I'm exporting these as OBJs. Again, they've been decimated, and then I will pull those over into my slicing program. And that slicing program is ChituBox. We're going to see that here in just a second. I am going to be printing this in resin with a resin printer. I'm using the Elegoo Saturn. A resin print, unlike FDM prints, you give a much nicer, smoother feature. I also merged all the pieces together, I exported all the pieces together as well, so that way I could size it for the plate. So here you can see my build plate in ChituBox, and I was just scaling him to find that percentage scale I wanted to have him fit on here. Like I said, I think it ended up being about 5 or 6 inches tall. From there, I import the individual parts and I just scale them by the same percentage I had on the large model. So now I'm rotating and orienting things for print, and then I'm adding supports. This video is not going to be in detail about how to add supports. Again, a lot of this comes from just kind of doing it a lot. I will say I err on the side of having too many supports. I would rather have too many supports and a successful print than a failed print. Most of my support techniques come from 3D Printing Pro on YouTube. He has all the knowledge you could ever want when it comes to supporting models for resin printing. So I highly recommend you check out 3D Printing Pro if you are doing resin printing and you aren't familiar with his stuff. I've also got to give a big shout out to Uncle Jesse, his YouTube channel. He does a lot when it comes to resin printing and FDM printing, but specifically resin printing. He's really kind of the king when it comes to resin printing on YouTube. So if you want to get more in depth on printing files and stuff like that, be sure and go check out his channel. So here I'm orienting it. I'm getting it to where basically the model, the parts of the model that are supported are going to make sense. The head was the trickiest. I had to angle it in such a way that his really thin hairs were kind of sticking up in the air, so I didn't have to worry about supports touching themselves to the hair. Ideally, I wouldn't have liked to have had so many supports on the top of his hat, but just because I wanted to be really careful about those thin hairs, that's why his head is aimed this way. Really, the only tricky area was his nose and needing to support it. In ChituBox, there's these red zones, and you'll see them as I turn around, that show the areas that really need support. And so this is me just trying to figure out the best way. I ended up doing one support that's not attached to the plate. I don't like to do that. But in the end, I was able to use a hobby knife to just kind of trim that out, and it was just fine. So almost have them all supported. The body, I probably could print flat to the build plate. I was considering it, but I decided to go ahead and rotate it and hollow it out. Hollowing, usually when you're printing something big, you want to hollow it so there's not too strong of suction forces on the build plate and the vat. And again, I'm not going to get into too much detail, but there's a lot you kind of have to learn when you get into resin printing. And so sometimes it works well to kind of angle things to where, again, the thin parts that need supports are kind of aimed up in the air, so they need fewer supports, and that's what I'm doing here. And here you'll see in ChituBox you can hollow the model. So there I did a hollow, and I kept it at about 2.5 millimeters thick. It was still pretty thick walls. And then the other thing you're seeing me doing here is I'm popping holes in the feet. And I'm doing that where the feet are going to touch the build plate so you won't see them. When you hollow a model, you have to create holes in the model so air can escape when it's printing, because it's dipping that model into the vat and pulling it up. And if there's no holes, it will suction the vat and it will basically get stuck to the vat. Again, it's I'm not going to get into too much depth here. I create some holes on the arms here and I hollow those as well. I decided not to mess with hollowing the head. The head is a small enough piece that I wasn't too worried about it. I probably didn't need to hollow the arms as well. But the body for sure, just because it's such a large piece. It's possible I could have printed it solid. It would have used a lot of resin. But just so I could ensure a successful print, I went ahead and hollowed it. Here you can see in ChituBox, once you get everything laid out, you can move the slicer up and down and see kind of the cross sections. And you can kind of analyze those to make sure you have everything supported correctly. And finally, I have the base. The base is simple. I'm not going to do any supports, just print it flat to the plate. It'll print fast. There it says on the time, 39 minutes. All right, so we're ready to print Popeye. I've got the files loaded on to this USB device. I'm going to plug it around the side. I don't have a good way of kind of showing you this, but there's a USB plug on the side. This is the Elegoo Saturn, which is one of the larger Elegoo DLP printers. I'm going to go ahead and take, this is a UV protective cover on here that keeps the UV light from exposing the resin. So we can't leave it off for too long, but I can take it off just for a little while I get things set. I'm using Sirius Sculpt Tech, which is one of the sturdier resins. I need to fill it up, kind of fill up the vat, because I'm going to be using a decent amount to print Popeye, because he's going to be rather large. So I'll shake this up, enough of here, and then I will pour it into the vat. Now sometimes you might want to kind of mix up the resins. I think I'll be okay with this. I use this, I printed with this resin just the other day, so it's fairly mixed. But if you want to, you can use something to stir with. Sometimes I will just put a glove on. It's probably a good idea to wear gloves when you handle resin. And I'll just stick my finger in and I'll stir it around, mix it up really good. And usually I just kind of do that just until I can see that the color is kind of even in the resin. There's not too many like obvious streaks and stuff. Just kind of give it a good little mix. Like I said, I just printed this using this resin the other day, so I'm not too worried about it. It should be good to go. Always have paper towels on hand, so I'll wipe this down. And while I do that, the other thing I like to do is I like to wipe the underside of, this is what is, the resin is going to attach to this plate. This plate is going to lower, it's going to expose the resin, this plate's going to lift up out of there. So I like to make sure this is good and clean, sometimes look under it. I'm using what's called a Wham Bam Flex plate, and I'll show you that later when I get the print off of here, but basically this is a detachable piece to the plate. So it makes it really easy for removing prints without having to take the whole apparatus off. So it's good to go. I'm going to reach behind here and I'm going to turn on the printer, and you'll be able to see on the display it comes to life. I don't have to worry about calibrating or anything like that. This machine's good to go. I'm going to hit print here, and here's my Popeye 2400. Again, he's 2400 scale, so that's why I labeled him. So I'll choose that. And you can see, just like it looked like in ChituBox, it's got the supports, it's all ready to go. I will hit play. And once I've hit play, you can look up here and you'll see that the plate is going to lower into that vat very slowly. It takes its time, so you still have time to change your mind. I only filled the resin up to, there's basically like a little fill line. If you fill it up too much, when that plate submerges into the resin, it can spill out, so you want to be really careful you don't put too much resin in it at one time. So basically, this is going to lower into the vat. Once this settles, the screen will expose. It'll expose the first layer for I think I have it set to like 60 seconds. So it'll expose for a minute, and then it'll raise up, and then it'll expose the next layer. Those first layers, they expose for a little while, so make sure it gets good and cured onto the plate. But then once it's finished those first layers, it'll move a lot faster. It'll only expose for a couple of seconds at a time. So here, if you look at the screen, you can see this is the first layer it's exposing. If you look at the back, you might see some UV light hitting the wall. There you can kind of see that purplish glow. So it lets you know, that shows you that the UV light is now on and it's now curing that first layer of resin. So it'll be on. Again, I think these first layers are close to a minute, I want to say. I have to go back and look. The Elegoo Saturn that I have here prints a lot faster than my previous resin printer, which is the Elegoo Mars. So sometimes I get those numbers a little mixed up in terms of what I have it dialed in. There you saw it exposed, and then that plate, it lifted and it went back down, and now it's exposing. There you see the light come on and exposing the next layer. So as we saw in ChituBox, this whole print is going to take about 7 hours. So I like to do these sort of prints before I go to bed, so that way I wake up in the morning and check, make sure everything's good. I'll let you see it raise up and then expose one more time. Yeah, you can see I've got things plugged into a surge protector over here. So heaven forbid we get into a lightning storm and it fries the printer. We should be good to go. There you see it lifts. And there's a little bit of a suction sound. That means that the plastic that was exposed, it's sticking to that plate and it's lifting up off of the bottom of the vat, which is like a soft plastic. And so when you hear that suction sound, it's basically the plastic detaching from the bottom of the vat, and we know that it's safely secured to the build plate. So I'm going to stop the video, and when I resume, hopefully this thing will be all good and printed. One more thing actually before I stop is I will replace the UV light cover. So I know that no leaking UV light. I'm actually right here next to a window, and I know that no extra UV light is somehow sneaking in and spoiling my resin. So it's good to go. I'm going to stop the video and we'll pick it back up when I'm ready to get this off the plate.
24 hours later.
Okay, so it's been 24 hours. I checked on the print this morning. It was good to go, but I didn't have a chance to shoot some video, so I waited. But it's okay to leave the print stuck to the build plate. And when I examined it this morning, it looked just fine. I'm going to take the UV cover off. And there you can see the prints stuck to the build plate. You see how it prints them upside down because it raises up out of that vat. So the next thing to do is to take the prints off of the build plate. Before you handle resin, this is the messy part. So this is where you definitely have to glove up. Always have lots of these gloves handy. And I also have paper towels handy because I definitely use quite a few of those. In fact, I don't like to tear them off the roll when my hands are all gummed up, so I like to get a couple just ready to go. Usually 2's fine, sometimes I need a 3rd. Alright, so the first thing I like to do is I'll wipe off the excess off the top. It can be scraped off, but we'll just take a paper towel to it. Just wipe off, because there's a lot that just kind of sits, kind of pools up on the top of that plate. And when I'm messing with things, I don't want it to get everywhere, so I like to go ahead and just kind of sop it up a little bit. All right, and now you get to see the beauty of using the Wham Bam plate. If you've used a resin printer and haven't used a Wham Bam plate, you're missing out. Well worth, I think it's a $50 upgrade. Well worth it, because I no longer have to remove the whole apparatus. I can just take it off of the plate. It's magnetic. And here you see the parts. They're all good to go. They look really nice. I don't know if you can see even the pipe printed out just fine in there. So, but normally you would have to pull this whole build plate off, and then you would have to scrape the prints off. But now you just unattach it, and then you can bend very gently. You bend, and then the parts will pop off when you just flex that plate. Now for some of the smaller ones, it's a little trickier. Certainly the big ones just come right off. So you just kind of work around it. Sometimes I get my thumbnail under there, just kind of get it started. But this is nothing compared to having to deal with using a scraper on the build plate. There we go. Now it's all off, and you see that there's a lot of resin left over. Again, I'll just take my paper towel, wipe it down as best as I can. Make sure there's no remaining cured pieces on there, because you wouldn't want those to get pressed into the bottom of the vat on your next print. Also try to clean off the top, because it usually gets a little messy when I go through that process. And then just line it up with the build plate and let go. And again, these are Wham Bam flex plates you can find online. If you have a resin printer, I highly recommend you get them. So the next thing I got to do is I've got to rinse these off in an alcohol bath of 91% proof rubbing alcohol or isopropyl alcohol. So I do that in 2 different baths. I have these little pickle jars, and one is the dirty bath. That's where some of my older resin that I've used to clean things goes, and then I have another one that just has some nice clear new alcohol that I'll eventually rinse them off with. But for now, I'm just going to do this. Sometimes you can pull off supports before you get them in the alcohol bath, and what I like to do is just kind of flex around on them. They come off really easy. You don't want to break your model though, so you got to be really careful. You just kind of push on them, twist, pinch. Usually for the most part though, they come off very simply. So I had a lot of supports on this guy, but it was well worth it because all my stuff seemed to print just perfectly. I would rather have to deal with little divots left behind by supports than have a failed print to deal with. So very happy with this. So those last ones are kind of stuck on there, just kind of bending back and forth. And I've got a trash can that I just put this in right beside me. All right, and then I will rotate this guy, pull these off, and I'm just going to do these one by one. Comes right off. There's the piece. That's the hand. Looks really good. Stick it in the alcohol bath. Throw away the supports. Just keep going through. Almost got them all done. Again, they pop off. They pop up pretty cleanly. I have my settings dialed in from 3D Printing Pro on YouTube. I also recommend, if you're looking to get into this stuff, checking out Uncle Jesse. He's kind of the king on YouTube when it comes to resin printing. And he also uses 3D Printing Pro settings, I believe, for the supports. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier when I was talking about the supports. Okay, so this was a tricky part, but I didn't use any supports because of the way I had them oriented. And you can see how those fine hairs printed out just perfectly. Hopefully, that's in focus enough so you can see that. But yeah, the hairs on him came out really careful. I think I'm going to rinse him separately just so I don't accidentally knock those hairs into something. And lastly, our pipe, the tiniest piece on here, came out great. Just kind of pinch these supports, trying to be really careful in the stuff that's breakable. This is strong Soraya sculpt resin, so it's supposed to be pretty durable, but I don't want to tempt fate with it. Before I get too far, I'm going to replace the cover on my printer, just because I don't like to leave that off. So I'll replace this. And now it's just a matter of getting in here and just kind of swishing these parts around. Sometimes you can take toothbrushes to them. What I'll do is I'll start with just kind of, instead of using the toothbrush, sometimes when I have my gloves, I'll just rub my fingers around them when they're in the alcohol bath. Just swish it around really good, make sure it gets nice, gets all that dirty resin off of it. And I'll actually probably, I may wait and let it dry a little bit before I eventually do the rinse in the clear alcohol. So I'll take that out. Another little plug for Wham Bam. I use a Wham Bam little, I don't even remember what this is called, but it's called slap mat to throw things on. They can kind of soak up the excess resin, and then you can eventually take it out into the sun, let it cure, and just clean it off. So I'm getting the second hand in here. Pull that out. Looks really good. And I think there's just the body left in here. So I'll rinse that out. But I won't worry you to death here. Essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to rinse these off just like you're seeing me do. I want to make sure that these hollow parts, you can see the holes on here, that they get nice and they get some alcohol up inside there. And you can kind of let that swish around. I think I may have had those on the arms too, and I forgot to do this. I'm probably going to stick those back in just to make sure. But really, it's just a matter of rinsing things off with alcohol really good, getting it all clean, and then once it's cleaned in the dirty bath, we'll put it in the clean bath, and then we'll let them sit and dry. From there, we'll glue our parts together. You can see that he stands up really nice, so that's going to make putting these arms on really easy. And I'll resume the video when I start to put these pieces on later, and we'll do that by just putting some resin on the parts and then curing the resin. Okay, so here we are again. I've run all these pieces through the bath. I tried to make sure I got in there because, you know, there's little holes in here because these are hollowed. So I tried to make sure these got rinsed out well. Hopefully they are. I believe they're pretty good. Sometimes when you only have one hole, it can be tricky because there's no way for the air to escape. So this is why I typically do 2 holes. But anyways, I think it's good and cleaned out. It should be just fine. So now it's time to start putting the pieces together, and we're going to glue it using resin and a UV light. So this is just a little UV light flashlight pin. I actually grabbed this from one of my kids' top secret UV pin, like a spy book they had or something. And it works great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the UV cover once more. Oh, and also I printed the base, and you know, that was just like I think it was a 50-minute print in all, and I ran that through the wash as well. It's still tacky. Before you've cured these, they have a kind of a tacky feel to them, so just be aware. It's probably okay to handle. It's been doused in alcohol and stuff like that, but I will wash my hands thoroughly after we're done here, just to be safe. So I think the first piece I'm going to put in is I'm going to put in his pipe. And the way I want to do that is I'm going to get some UV resin on the tip of the pipe, and then we're going to insert it right there into his mouth where it should go, and then I'll use the UV pin to glue it. So I'm going to dip just the tip of that pipe in, get some nice fresh resin on there. It might be a little bit much. Okay, kind of dab it in there. All right, I don't want it to get too much of a bubble there. I think that's, let's see, got a little bit much on here. I wipe it off a little bit. Okay. All right, I think that'll work. Get the pipe in place where you want it. And this is where the magic happens. I'm going to move a little away from the 3D printer here, just so I don't accidentally get some UV light on there. Okay, and then I'm just shine it on, and we can shine it for however long. It just needs to tack on there because we are going to fully cure this here in a second under a UV light, a little chamber that I have set up. So that's probably going to be good. Wait, and you can kind of see it'll go from shiny to kind of dull as it does it. So it's on there pretty good. Okay, and you know, you can always hit it longer if you're not sure. Get that UV light up and close to it. Okay. Okay, here we go. Hopefully you can see it better now. Make sure I'm showing these things to the camera. Okay. So, anyways, it's in there. Shake it. It's not coming out. Again, this is kind of a thin piece, so I want to be kind of careful with it, but I think it's in there pretty good. Okay. So, similarly, we can work his arms and his head on here. I've kind of already been messing with fitting the head, just making sure everything's on there pretty good, and it fits pretty well. And you can kind of see that it's touching the top. You can see from the white marks on the inside that it's touching the top when I put that all the way in, because it kind of scratches it. And when this stuff scratches, it gets white, just kind of the nature of it. Ultimately, you may want to sand things down and then spray paint them. So that means I just need to get a little bit here on the end. I could try dipping this. It might be a little tricky. Let's see what happens. So I'm going to see if I can just dip that neck in without getting anything else in. This might be asking for trouble. Okay. Oh, I got some on there. Doesn't take a lot. So here you can see it's on there. Stick that in here. Now is a good time to maybe figure out the angle of the head, because I didn't do this as a square peg. It's a round peg. The angle can probably shift pretty easy. I have an image pulled up on my phone. I'm just going to double check. I think this is in a good place here. I think more or less is like that. So we're going to go with that. Again, if you wanted to lock the angle in, you would have used like a square peg instead of a cylinder. But this should work. So again, I'm going to move it away from my UV table, and let's see if I can kind of get to where the video shows me shining the light in there. Sometimes it's worth taking a toothpick, getting some resin in there, and just kind of building it up around there. I may not have gotten quite enough resin for this to hold. So you're just curing it with the UV light. Now this head is solid, it's not hollow, so it's got a little bit of weight to it. So I don't want it to come crashing down, but lo and behold, I think that works. Okay. Again, to be safe, oh, no, see? To be safe, I may need a little bit more resin on there. So, let's see. I'm going to very carefully dip this in again. Those arms will be a little bit easier to dip in than this head. There we go. Now it's got some good excess there. I'm going to hold that into position, and then we'll take it over here, shine a light, and you can see how that, just that excess even just kind of creates a nice seam on the neck. Okay, and then we'll go and get the other side. Just try to make sure it gets nice and good in there. Again, it's got to support all the weight of that head. I think it's going to be okay. Kind of test it. Perfect. Okay, it's on there good. And again, I don't want to tempt fate and turn them upside down, but I think that's enough to hold it until the final curing. All right, so for the arms, it'll be a little bit easier to dip in. Just dip it in the vat. Now, we want to make sure we get the right arm. You can usually tell just by from the thumbs. So it's not too hard. All right, and then you want to get the angle of the arm correct. I think that's good. Okay, for here, I'm going to see if I can stand him up. Hopefully that head's, see that head is weighing him down. I probably should have put the head on last now that I think about it, but that's right. You know, I'm probably going to need a few more hands, so what I think I'm going to do is we'll stop the video, and I get some help to hold these things together and glue them. So I'll get them glued, and then that's pretty much it. From here, you know, you may do some sanding or whatever, and then we will cure it in the cure box, and I'll show that, a video of it curing on the cure box and a video of the final product. But that's how you put them together. He printed really nice. The pieces fit together really well. So here I just have to go through and kind of UV glue everything together. The cure box. So here he is in what I call the cure box. Really all it is a little photo studio box that I have, and I've got a couple of strong UV lights in there and a turntable. And I just leave him in here with those UV lights on. The UV lights power the turntable, and he'll just go around to get evenly coated. Sometimes I will just take a model and leave it out in the sun. This is probably as far as I'm going to go for this video with the model. I get him cured. You'll see there's some little pock marks and stuff where the supports are. Those can just be lightly sanded. In the end, I'll probably lightly sand and paint him eventually. But for this purpose of this video, you can see the print. Here it is, the vinyl print outside the cure, but still just turning around. You can check it out. I hope this was helpful. I realize I ran through it really fast. I also want to let you know that if you have a resin printer and you want to try printing Popeye, I'm going to go ahead and put my models up for sale, probably for like $5 on Cults 3D. So you can go check those out at the link, and you can feel free to download the model. You can even print him out FDM if you have an FDM printer. If you do, I hope you'll let me know how it goes in the comments below. In the meantime, just like, comment, subscribe. Let me know if you'd like to see more printing videos or get more in depth with this stuff. Thank you guys.